Have you ever wondered why certain people or situations really get under your skin? Or why you sometimes feel like parts of yourself are missing? Well, you're not alone. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, believed there's a hidden side to all of us, a side we'd rather not see. He called it the shadow. And if we don't deal with it, it runs the show, shaping our lives in ways we don't even realize. In this video, we're diving deep into what the shadow is, how it shows up in your life, and most importantly, how you can work with it to heal and grow. Let's get started. Carl Jung's idea of the shadow is basically the part of yourself you don't want to see or admit exists. It's the stuff you shove deep down because it doesn't fit with how you like to see yourself or how society wants you to act. Think of it as that hidden closet where all the mess gets tossed. The anger, jealousy, fear, or even the parts of you that are creative or bold, but were shut down when you were younger. It's not just bad stuff, though. Sometimes it's potential or qualities you haven't owned yet. The shadow hangs out in your unconscious, and it influences you in sneaky ways. Like, ever overreacted to someone and thought, whoa, where did that come from? That's probably your shadow projecting onto them. Jung's whole vibe was, if you don't face your shadow, it'll run your life from behind the scenes. As Jung puts it, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Let's say there's a kid who's naturally super curious and outspoken. They love asking questions like, why is the sky blue? Or, why do grown-ups get to make all the rules? The kind of kid who just lights up a room with their energy. But let's say this child grows up in a family where adults constantly say things like, you ask too many questions, stop talking so much. You're too much, calm down. Kids should be seen, not heard. The kid starts to internalize the message that being curious and outspoken is bad or annoying. To avoid getting criticized or rejected, they suppress those traits. They stop asking questions, hold back their opinions, and maybe even feel embarrassed about their natural energy. Over time, that part of them becomes part of their shadow, the part of themselves they've buried. Now, fast forward to adulthood. That suppressed energy doesn't just disappear. It shows up in different, often unconscious ways. Maybe they find themselves really annoyed by people who are loud or overly curious because they've repressed that part of themselves and can't stand to see it in others. They might struggle to speak up for themselves at work or in relationships, feeling like their voice isn't important. Or it could even come out as sudden bursts of frustration or anger when they've held things in for too long. Jung would say the key here is to recognize that the outspoken, curious part of themselves isn't bad. It's just been buried. Once they become conscious of it, they can integrate it into their life in a healthy way, maybe by finding spaces where they feel safe to ask questions or express themselves fully. When we judge or react strongly to something in someone else, it's often because it's hitting on something we've suppressed in ourselves, something buried in our shadow. It's like seeing a mirror we don't want to look into. Here's the idea. The traits we judge harshly in others tend to be the same traits we've disowned in ourselves. Why? Because they've been pushed into our unconscious, and we're not fully aware of them. When we see those traits in someone else, it triggers us because it brings up unresolved stuff we've tried to bury. Jung called this projection, when we take parts of ourselves and project them onto others, often without realizing it. Imagine someone who prides themselves on being super disciplined and organized. They've been raised to believe that being lazy is the worst thing ever. Over time, they suppress any desire to relax or take it easy, because to them, that feels like being lazy. They don't even let themselves feel laziness. It's totally buried. Now, they meet someone who's laid back and chill, maybe a little messy, and boom, they can't stand them. They think, ugh, they're so irresponsible. But the truth is, their strong reaction has less to do with the other person and more to do with their own suppressed desire to take a break and not be so rigid all the time. That laid-back person is showing them a part of themselves they've disowned, and that makes them uncomfortable. The same principle can work in reverse. If you admire or envy something in someone, It might be a quality in yourself you haven't allowed to fully come out yet. Jung's big takeaway? If you catch yourself judging someone intensely, it's worth asking, is this really about them, or is this about me? What part of myself am I not seeing here? It's not about excusing bad behavior in others. It's about using your reactions as a tool to understand yourself better. Integrating the shadow is one of those deep but transformative processes that Jung believed leads to true healing and self-awareness. It's about bringing those suppressed parts of yourself, your shadow, into the light of consciousness, understanding them, and accepting them as part of who you are. When you do that, you stop letting those unconscious forces control your life from the background. Here's a practical, step-by-step breakdown of how to begin shadow work and integrate those parts of yourself. 1. Acknowledge its existence. First, recognize that you have a shadow. Everyone does. It's not a flaw or something to be ashamed of. The shadow isn't inherently bad. It's just the parts of yourself you've hidden or denied. Accepting that it's there is the first step. Second, notice triggers. Pay attention to strong emotional reactions, judgment, anger, jealousy, or even intense admiration. These are like signposts pointing to shadow material. Ask yourself, why does this person or situation bother me so much? What might this say about me? For example, if someone's arrogance irritates you, is there a part of you that wishes you could be more confident but feels afraid to show it? Here are 10 more examples to make it clearer. 1. Feeling envious of someone's success. Have you ever found yourself feeling resentful when someone achieves something amazing? Maybe it's not really about them. It could be a sign that deep down, you're yearning for success or recognition in your own life, but feel blocked in some way. Their success just highlights what you wish you could pursue. 2. Getting frustrated with indecisiveness. Do you ever feel annoyed when someone just can't make up their mind? It might be because a part of you is uncomfortable with your own uncertainty, or the fear of making a wrong decision. Maybe you're so focused on appearing confident and capable that you suppress the part of yourself that needs time to reflect and weigh options. 3. Being offended by manipulative behavior. When someone is controlling or manipulative, does it really get under your skin? This could mean there's a small part of you that also tries to influence situations in subtle ways, but doesn't like to admit it. Seeing it in someone else makes you uncomfortable because you reject that behavior in yourself. 4. Rolling your eyes at oversensitivity. Have you ever thought, why are they so emotional about this? If so, it might be worth asking whether you've learned to push down your own emotions to avoid being seen as vulnerable. Their openness might be challenging you to confront that part of yourself. 5. Feeling irritated by arrogance. When someone is really full of themselves, does it make you angry? That reaction could mean there's a part of you that wishes you could feel more confident and proud, but is afraid of being judged for it. Their arrogance might just be a reflection of your own insecurities about showing off your talents. 6. Admiring someone who's perfect. Have you ever been in awe of someone who seems to have it all together? Sometimes, that admiration can actually reveal a belief that you're not good enough as you are. You might be projecting your unfulfilled desire for perfection onto them. 7. Judging someone for being selfish. Do you get upset when people put themselves first? That reaction might actually stem from your own exhaustion. Maybe you're always giving to others and secretly wish you could prioritize yourself, but feel guilty about the idea. Their selfishness reflects your own unmet need for self-care. 8. Criticizing rebellious behavior. Does breaking the rules bother you? It could be that you've buried your own desire to live more freely, or challenge authority because you're afraid of what might happen if you do. Their defiance might stir up the part of you that wants to break free, but feels too scared. 9. Disliking someone's naivety. Do you ever think someone is too innocent or trusting? Maybe it's because you've hardened yourself to the world after being hurt, and now struggle to reconnect with your own sense of wonder and trust. Their openness might remind you of what you've lost. 10th, feeling annoyed by dependency. Does it bother you when someone leans on others too much? This could mean you've rejected your own need for help or support because you value being independent so much. Their behavior might be a mirror, showing you the part of yourself that's afraid to ask for help. 3. The last and most important step. The last and most important step in shadow work is to face your shadow without fear. Embracing the so-called bad within you doesn't make you evil, it makes you human, complete with the necessary flaws that define and shape your existence. These imperfections are not failures, they are fragments of your story, born from your experiences and survival. By accepting these parts with compassion, you allow them to integrate into your being, transforming judgment into understanding and shame into self-awareness. This is where true healing begins, not by erasing your shadow, but by honoring its role in making you whole. Thanks for watching. If you found this content helpful, inspiring, or just something worth sharing, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me keep creating more amazing content for you. See you in the next video.